The most powerful manipulators don't speak, they watch. And before you realize it, you're already under their control. Have you ever walked into a room and just felt something shift? Like someone silently pulled the strings of the atmosphere, and suddenly, everyone's mood, focus, or direction changed, without a single word spoken? That's not magic, that's manipulation. And smart people? They're some of the best at it. Not because they're evil masterminds, but because they understand something most people don't. You don't need to speak to influence. In fact, the most powerful manipulation often happens in complete silence. We usually think of manipulation as something obvious: words, guilt trips, aggressive persuasion, or sweet talk loaded with hidden intentions. But there's a quieter version of it, one that lives in body language, facial expressions, energy, timing, silence, and subtle cues. It's invisible if you don't know what to look for. But once you do, you start noticing it everywhere. Psychology calls this nonverbal communication, and research shows that over 90% of our emotional meaning in conversations is communicated through body language, facial expressions, tone, and gestures, not actual words. That's not just trivia. That's a blueprint for how smart people get in your head without ever opening their mouth. Smart manipulators use silence as a tool. They know when not to speak. They know when to make eye contact and when to avoid it. They know that pausing for 3 seconds too long in a conversation can make the other person uncomfortable enough to spill more information just to fill the silence. This tactic is backed by the conversational imbalance principle, where silence makes people feel compelled to talk, to restore equilibrium, often revealing more than they intend. Let's make it real with a story. Picture this. There's a guy named Theo. He's in his late 20s, works at a marketing firm, and doesn't say much in meetings. In fact, he's often the quietest one in the room. But somehow, when the big decisions are made, his ideas always seem to be the ones people go with. Not because he fights for them, not because he talks the most, but because he plays the long game. One day, the team is pitching ideas for a major client. Everyone's talking over each other, bouncing ideas, throwing buzzwords like synergy and brand activation like confetti. Theo sits there, arms crossed, silent, watching. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't argue. He waits. And then, when the energy dips, when everyone's a little tired, a little unsure, he leans in slightly, makes eye contact with the team lead, and just nods at the whiteboard where one of the earlier, almost forgotten ideas is written down. No words, just a look, a nod. The team lead pauses, looks at Theo, then says, "Actually, that one might work. Let's build on that." Suddenly, the team is rallying behind the idea Theo silently endorsed. He didn't push it, he didn't campaign, he just planted the seed, without saying anything. That's silent manipulation. It works because of a few core tactics that smart people understand, many of which are backed by psychological research. First, presence is power. You don't have to say anything to have influence. If you carry yourself with calm confidence, people notice. According to psychologist Albert Mehrabian's studies, 55% of communication is body language. Theo wasn't loud, but his posture, stillness, and timing said, "I'm thinking. I'm not desperate to be seen." That made people assign more value to his opinion when he did act. Second, timing matters more than volume. A lot of people try to win influence by talking more. Smart people manipulate by choosing when to act, not just how. Theo didn't fight for attention. He waited for the exact moment when the group was looking for direction and gave it, non-verbally. The silence before his gesture gave it weight. It felt intentional. Third, micro-expressions are powerful. These are tiny, involuntary facial expressions that happen in less than half a second. According to psychologist Paul Ekman, these can reveal someone's true feelings, and trained manipulators can control their own micro-expressions to appear confident, calm, or trustworthy. A small smirk, a momentary eye twitch, a raised eyebrow. All these send emotional cues that people respond to, even if they don't consciously notice them. Smart manipulators also use mirroring, another well-documented psychological tactic. Mirroring is when someone subtly copies another person's gestures, tone, or posture. Research from the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior confirms that mirroring increases likability and rapport. Smart people use this to silently make others feel in sync with them. If someone crosses their arms, they'll do the same. If someone leans forward, so do they. The result? The other person starts feeling more connected, without understanding why. Now imagine this in negotiations, or interviews, or dating. It works because humans are wired to trust people who resemble them. It's called the similarity attraction effect, a psychological phenomenon where we unconsciously like those who seem like us. So when a manipulator mirrors you, you feel like you click, when in reality, they've just hacked your trust system. Smart manipulators also use absence as a psychological weapon. This one's subtle, but it messes with your head. When someone withdraws, becomes emotionally distant, or goes quiet without explanation, it creates uncertainty. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement, the same concept that makes slot machines addictive. Sometimes you get attention, sometimes you don't. The unpredictability makes you crave the connection even more. Let's bring it back to Theo. There was another moment at his office. A co-worker, Mia, was being loud about her new campaign idea. She was confident, persuasive, and a little condescending. Everyone listened to her pitch. Theo? He didn't react. No smile, no nod, no disagreement. He just stayed silent. And after the meeting, when she tried to follow up with him one-on-one, he politely smiled, nodded once, and said, "I think it's interesting," then walked away. No compliment, no insult, just a neutral response and distance. Mia was thrown off. Suddenly, she started seeking his approval, asking him for feedback, trying harder to engage him. Without realizing it, she was trying to impress the one person who hadn't validated her. Theo's silence had power, because it made people wonder. Here's the thing. When someone talks a lot, you know where they stand. But when someone stays silent, people start projecting. They wonder what you're thinking, what you're planning, if you approve or disapprove. That mystery? It makes people chase your validation. Smart people manipulate with that silence. Psychologically, this taps into what's called the Zeigarnik effect, our tendency to remember and fixate on incomplete experiences. When someone doesn't close the loop, when they don't tell you what they're thinking or feeling, you stay mentally hooked, trying to figure it out. It's not just in the workplace. Look at relationships. We all know someone who can control the vibe of an entire room just by their energy. They don't have to argue, they don't have to raise their voice. They can just withdraw, and suddenly everyone feels off. That's not magic. It's emotional conditioning. Someone gives you the cold shoulder. They don't fight. They don't explain. They just stop engaging. And because we're wired to resolve emotional discomfort, most people start apologizing, over-explaining, or bending over backwards to restore the connection. That's manipulation without a word. It's emotional control through psychological tension. And the wild part? It often looks peaceful, calm, innocent. So you can't even call it out. It's just quiet disapproval. There's also spatial manipulation, how people use their physical presence to dominate or control a room. Standing slightly above others, sitting at the head of a table, controlling personal space to either intimidate or comfort. Psychologist Edward T. Hall coined the term proxemics to describe this, how people use space to communicate power, intimacy, or boundaries. Think about it. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone stood too close and you felt off balance? Or someone stepped just far enough back that you had to lean in? That wasn't accidental. It was silent manipulation. The best manipulators combine all these tactics into one quiet, unshakable style. They don't raise their voice, they don't chase attention, they just tilt the room, subtly, in their direction. And here's what might surprise you. You probably do some of this too. Because not all manipulation is bad. Sometimes we influence others non-verbally to protect ourselves, build trust, or connect more deeply. Silent influence becomes toxic when it's used for control, deception, or emotional power plays. But knowing it exists, that gives you power. Because now, when someone walks into the room and suddenly shifts the vibe, when silence starts feeling heavy, when you notice your own thoughts bending around someone else's calm, you can pause and think, is this confidence or is it control? You start seeing the micro movements, the withdrawal, the timing. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You stop reacting to every raised eyebrow. You unplug from the invisible game. And that alone makes you harder to manipulate. Because silent manipulators rely on people not knowing what's happening. They rely on you filling the gaps with your emotions, your overthinking, your need for connection. But once you see the pattern, they lose their edge. Because silence might be golden. But awareness? That's bulletproof. So the next time someone gets their way without saying a single word, ask yourself, was that just a coincidence? Or did you just witness a masterclass in psychological manipulation? And better yet, are you ready to play the game back? If you're into psychology and understanding how the mind works, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more.